pleasure to be here in this process, and that's Lee Stratford, who is our CFO and is the co-chair of this impact focus area. So this is one of the impact focus areas the university identified as an area that we expect to make a significant difference as a university in tackling a societal problem that is epical, basically, like the pathway towards a sustainable society, and there is a lot of strength at the university. Corinne introduced our panel today, and these are amazing researchers or administrators, but I can assure you we have many more at this university, so this is some specific snapshot today. This is also very much work in progress. We're developing this strategy at the moment, so it's very important to get feedback from the room. We'll try to make at least half an hour of time for the Q&A in the room, so have a think of what you think the challenges are and where you think we have opportunities. And let's keep in mind that so the major part is to identify how we can bring the forces together at UNSW and how we can use our unique strength at the university to tackle like the pathway towards a sustainable society. Kicking off, sort of thinking about where we stand, while sort of say if we look at climate change, there is more and more renewable energies in the mix. There are massive challenges because as there are more renewable energies in our supply, the global amount of carbon that is emitted is constantly increasing. There are also challenges in society around the pathway to net zero, the sort of not being clear about the timelines, which are extremely tight, not having fact-focused conversations, for example, like what are the timelines for certain technologies to be implemented. In the meantime, we also see massive migration. This is a problem for the globe. And while we don't feel maybe the impact in Australia as much as, for example, our colleagues in the US have seen right now, sort of in the southern US with the hurricanes. We have seen heat waves here, we have seen bushfires. This is not something that is hypothetical, we know that. It is something that really needs to be resolved quickly. I will kick off and let the panelists each introduce themselves very briefly so that we know where what their background is and what they bring to this discussion. And then we go into the conversation. Ben, sit next to me. Why don't you kick off?
Thanks very much, Sven, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this panel and part of this development of the strategy. So my name's Ben Newell. I'm a professor in psychology in School of Psychology here at UNSW, and I'm also the director of the Institute for Climate Risk and Response. And my background, my research is in experimental psychology, so thinking about how people make decisions, how they understand risk, how they understand uncertainty. And in the past few years, I've been concentrating on how to apply that knowledge to think about how people understand climate change and how we can maximize climate action through understanding of behavioral science. My role in the Institute, so the Institute was launched last year. It's a collaboration between Faculty of Science, Faculty of Business, and the Faculty of Law and Justice. And it brings together researchers in those three faculties that are all focusing broadly on climate risk and response. So we have projects that are involving climate scientists, working with economists, working with legal scholars, all different aspects of those three faculties, all focusing on that. So I think that the Institute is front and center, really, of this part of the strategy, part of the Progress for All, because it's really trying to build across the strengths that the university has and contribute to understanding how we get to this sustainable society.
Thank you, Ben. Bill.
Thank you, Sven. Good morning. I'm Will Sydall, Head of Environmental Sustainability at UNSW. My team, we're based in estate management and operations, and we're focused on our environmental sustainability strategies and initiatives at, for our physical campuses and operations, and that includes engagement on sustainability. So my background is working in corporate sustainability in consultancies and large organisations to help develop and implement and report on sustainability strategies. So I'm not from the academic world, but I have been working here at UNSW for over 6 years now. So that's a bit about my background. So we have an environmental sustainability plan, which is coming to an end this year. And that sets out all of our priorities across climate action, living campuses, and resource efficiency. So, you know, I'm really excited to see the direction of the new strategy, in particular this this pillar around transition to a sustainable society. And there's a real kind of genuine opportunity to you know, build this into, you know, to align our next sustainability plan with wherever this lands, and make sure that we've got some really bold and you know, tangible initiatives in there to help us get there.
Hi, I'm Alistair Poor, Head of School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences. That's such a mouthful that everyone calls it bees. This is a very large and diverse school that does a lot of the science to describe some of the problems we have. So we've got the university's, you know, large group of climate scientists, we have marine scientists, we have earth scientists. We've got all the people that describe, you know, our problems in great detail. But the thing that excites me about this strategy is that we also are very much focused on creating solutions to those problems. And that's what motivates a lot of our scientists and motivates a lot of the students that come to study with us. Those solutions are in sort of both advice and, you know, policy impact that our research can have out to our government partners and to other areas, but it also includes really direct action. So we're literally restoring habitats in the desert. We're restoring kelp forests on the Sydney coast. We're modifying the management of wetlands. And so we're doing lots and lots of very direct actions, particularly around conservation management and policy that aligns, in my view, very nicely with our university strategies. So my background is in marine ecology, so I'm personally involved in some of the marine restoration efforts, but the school as a whole is doing these sorts of positive conservation and environmental actions across a very wide range of activities. So enjoy the rest.
So I'm Emma. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Chemical Engineering. In terms of, I suppose, sustainability for all, there are two key sort of aspects of my role that feed into the theme, but the first is just our research on technology development. So within our school and within our research group, we look at developing sustainable technologies. Can we convert carbon dioxide into synthetic fuels, or produce fertilizers without the need for fossil fuels? Looking at sustainable pathways and technologies that can be used to help accelerate and drive this transition. So the first, I suppose, pillar is looking at that key research and technology development that we do. The second aspect that I'm really passionate about is that the university's role is to educate future leaders. And so looking at ways that we can embed sustainability into our curriculum, into our projects, into the project-based learning courses that we teach, so that our graduates are moving forward into the world and looking at everything with a sustainability lens. So all of our chemical engineers go out working on projects that look at circularity and sustainability and the environmental impact and footprint of the processes and technologies that they're working on, so that these future leaders can have this in the back of their mind too.
Thank you all for. Maybe just two more points from me before we go into the discussion. From my perspective, the accelerating the transition to a sustainable society is a very strong theme, because it de-silos the universities. We bring together a lot of the work in energy decarbonization that has a strong foothold in engineering, not only. We bring the ecology together, say, from these technologies, chemical engineering, but also climate change at large, psychology, decision making from Ben. There's also not only what can we do for the future in influencing society and giving solutions to society, there's also walking the walk along the lines we talk. And that's very much in Will's space. What can we do on this campus to be a beacon of doing the right thing? And our UNSW is already doing a lot of things, but we need to do more. So the first question is, what does society need to do in order to accelerate the transition to a sustainable society? And please jump in as you see fit.
It's a big question.
It's a big question.
It is a big question.
I mean, society at large needs to consume less, I think is the simple way to think about it. That there's lots of now, alternative solutions and lower carbon alternatives to things. But I think the main message that I would give from a behavioural perspective is that we have to consume less so that we can remain within our planetary boundary, if you want to think about it like that. And I think that the broader understanding of what those limits are and the ways in which we can adapt but still thrive is what we need to be doing. And I think that comes from an education as well, a role that the university can play really strongly. So picking up on the theme that Emma was mentioning about wanting to create future leaders. I mean, that's something that we're all conscious of. Any of us that are involved in, all of us that are involved in teaching at the university are thinking about making sure that our graduates, when they leave, have a better understanding of what they can contribute and what they can do. And one of the things that I've done in psychology, in school of psychology, is develop a course that runs as a capstone, so the third year course that all students graduating have to do, which is an explicit course that links the UN Sustainable Development Goals to aspects of psychological science. So it's really challenging the students to think back on the 3 years of work that they've done and think, maybe behavioural science and psychology is not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about UN Sustainable Development Goals, but actually there's very strong links into things like education, into good health and well-being, into economic prosperity. All of these things that are identified in the goals can be linked into themes that the students have been studying over the past 3 years, and that then pushes them towards thinking, okay, this is how I can drive towards a more sustainable society and understand what we need to do, even if I hadn't gone into the degree thinking in that way and I hadn't been the intention at the start. But by the end of it, that's what I'm taking out of it. And I think that can only then contribute towards a greater understanding of what we all need to do as a whole society.
Can I push you on a specific point? Because it's always hard when you tell people they cannot do something. And I think I will come back to the point of education. I'm using more electrical power now than I used 2 years ago. But I'm not using anything from the grid anymore. I actually export in the grid because I'm using the technology. I put good old solar cells on my roof and get a battery. It's like, could we reflect on when we say use less in regard to what we can do with education so people embrace change to pollute less?
Yeah, I just think that there's obviously a message that you can change to alternative sources of energy. You can have an EV instead of a petrol-driven car. But all of these things are, I think it still has to be, yes, people don't like being told they can't do stuff. And there's always a tension between who is it that has the position that allows me to say, no, I know best for you. This is what you should do. And the work that I've done a lot with the government in the behavioural science teams, where they're focusing on how do we develop policy that has a more behavioural flavour to it, that acknowledges the way that people understand information that they're being given, the way that they will behave. And yes, being told not to do something is a hard message for people to take. But at the same time, I think we have to just be realistic and acknowledge that just if everyone has EVs, it's not going to solve the problem. It's going to be better, but it just has to be a message of less rather than equivalence, I think.
Just to build on that, one of the things in terms of accelerating towards a more sustainable future is also thinking about the bigger picture of what we're doing. So absolutely we can switch to EVs or use solar panels, but are we kicking the can down the road when it comes to then critical mineral using and recycling? If we start to look at different ways to transport energy throughout the world instead of using fossil fuels, are we going to start to disrupt the nitrogen cycle in 50 years' time. So there is a push to accelerate toward a more sustainable future, but I think there should be a slowing down and looking at a big picture perspective on exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, so that we aren't sort of succumbing to that very quick, like, oh, instead of using a plastic bottle, let's use a recycled, like an aluminium one, but we'll chuck that out after a month. Your carbon footprint there, your sustainable footprint is way worse than using plastic water bottles, because the energy going into getting that aluminium for that bottle is way more. So it's doing things sustainably, but also being conscious of the life cycle of that whole process as well.
Beyond just the sort of carbon and climate and energy things, one of the ways we can really have some influence is to give the general public a pathway to contribute to some of these things. And in my field of sort of biodiversity monitoring and wildlife and flora and fauna, one of the really striking things in the last decade or so has been the increased participation of the community in the monitoring and measurement of, our native flora and fauna. All sorts of citizen science apps, community science programs, and that gives people that aren't in science an avenue to do something positive and contribute, but also for us to educate very broadly about some of the challenges. So we need to educate, obviously, in terms of usage and climate and, carbon issues, but there's another great big crisis that we're worried about, which is the biodiversity one. And one of our roles as educators is obviously to get more and more people aware of those issues, but giving them pathways of positive change as well. And citizen science has been very effective in doing that in a bunch of programs.
At a campus perspective, there's lots of things we're working on. There are lots of more things that we can do, but I think it does come back to certainly a society, and to an extent as an organisation, it comes back to Ben's point. It's hard to pull back within those 6 planetary boundaries that system science tell us that we've transgressed without consuming less. There's lots of ways that we can do that, but it's hard to get away from that. There's, moving away from fossil fuels is absolutely essential. Reducing our impacts on nature, absolutely essential. But it's very hard to do all of that without reducing consumption.
Okay, so if we move on to the next question, what are the main opportunities and challenges presented to us here in Australia? And what role can we play as UNSW locally and globally? Also keeping in mind that the Asia Pacific, not every country has the same sort of resources in the solar population density as Australia has.
So from a technology perspective, Australia has a huge opportunity to look at ways that we can essentially leverage our abundant, variable, renewable energy resources as a tool to drive economic growth. I think we need to be careful about certain ways, again, that we do things so we can utilize our abundant natural resources, but we need to convert that energy into chemical energy as a way to transport and distribute it throughout the world. So Australia has the potential to be positioned as a global leader in the hydrogen economy, in solar panels, in all of these different aspects, but coming back to my point before, it needs to be done in a thoughtful and sustainable way, looking at the bigger picture. So an example of this is iron ore. Currently, we mine iron ore, we export it. The iron ore is processed using energy, coal, other things overseas, and then we ship it back. So can we look at using our natural resources as well as our energy to export energy in the form of steel or in other aspects? So it's, looking at the big picture way that we can leverage that technology, not for short-term economic gain, for sustainability moving forward.
And what would you like to see UNSW do in that space in 2025? What would be one of the first steps stones for us? How we contribute there?
Yeah, so I think from a uni perspective, we have a huge amount of technology being developed. So I think that there's a way that we can look to transition that technology into industry. So that's the first thing, looking at easing or reducing barriers to the impact that our research can make. And that's obviously a benefit for UNSW and for society. The second is looking at policy advocacy so that we can do things that make sense. So an example of things that make sense, if you were to look at producing carbon-based fuels in a green way, you actually can't use CO2 emissions from a power plant and convert them into fuels. That doesn't reach a green certification. If you burn wood chips and make CO2 and turn that into a fuel, that's green. So there's ways, there's this nuance in policy and in views and perspectives that the uni could be lobbying for the government to look for big picture change too.
Is there, you mentioned lowering barriers. Do you see a way how we can engage in a more efficient way with outside partners?
I think there's complexity from a uni perspective and an industry perspective in engaging that way. Absolutely. There's differing timelines, there's differing expectations, but there's absolutely things that we can do to incentivize. So incentivize knowledge transfer for sure.
Thank you. So traditionally, this works very much academic to academic, or potentially maybe public sector. Look at Ben. But do you see ways how we could make that more mission focused and bring people together? Like people use the example of a sandbox. Can we create a sandbox to work on a specific problem, and how would you see that?
Yeah, I think that there's a tendency, particularly in research, to be siloed. I'm going to sit in my lab and focus on this one CO2 conversion, for example. So if we can connect better with one, industry needs, but two, across the uni trying to leverage different expertise together, there is a much greater potential for bigger benefits. So, for example, I work in the Tyree Energy Technologies building. That building contains electrical engineers and chemical engineers. It contains SPRE. It contains MIR, mining, mineral energy resource engineering. Sorry, got the acronym wrong. And that was designed as a way to try and de-silo a lot of things, but that's still sitting within engineering. So there's potential to do more and expand more as well.
Do you want to talk to how we bring ecology quicker
into
the transition?
So a nice example of how the university has a great opportunity to add value to these sorts of problems is one of my colleagues who's a plant ecologist. So he spent his career understanding how plants grow and live and plant diversity. But through connections with engineers recently who are involved in the deployment of solar farms, they had the desire to implement those farms in ways that had least impact on the biodiversity in the areas they do them. So now that's developed into a really sizable contract, which will advise the people putting out solar farms to implement those in ways that have lower impact on other things that we care about. And that's the sort of value that a university can bring, because we've got ecologists, we've got engineers, we've got business people that can advance ideas. But if we hadn't made those connections, both groups, either into the campus could have just been doing stuff in isolation. So I think the huge opportunity for UNSW is that we have the expertise across that range of things needed to actually get stuff done. Hopefully that will influence how that particular company does their work, but even better, it's like if that could be brought into policy recommendations for how these things get, scaled up and done more generally, then our university impact is even larger. And so it's bringing those groups together in those sort of projects.
I think one of the big challenges is bringing people together and finding, I would never have thought to go up to Bees to have a discussion about the way that we can do things more, or even the course that you run is similar to a course that we run. We have a 4th year ethics and sustainability course. There's so many shared things that we can learn from each other and also benefit, but it's finding the way to make those connections, and then if it is incentivizing them to move forward too.
And we need to do it quite quickly as well, because you might have noticed there's actually community pushback against solar farms in some areas because they're clearing vegetation. And so you end up with these, two things. We want the solar farms, we want the energy. people also want forests and they want koalas. And so we need to work on some of these solutions that lessen the impacts to enable other things quite quickly to keep the community buy-in for our actions.
Maybe to the other panel members.
Pass around the mic because it's dropping out. So
Okay. I think this works now. Does it? Yeah, to fix it. Great.
So no, it doesn't. 2024.
Here we go. So to the other two panel members, what Alistair and Emma described is amazing, but right now it relies a little bit on the random walk and a cup of coffee, which is powerful, but how can we do better? How can we create those engagements with more efficiency or at scale? Ben, you run an institute. I'm sure you thought about that.
Create institutes. I mean, yeah, the Institute for Climate Risk and Response was the idea for it was to bring together those different groups from different faculties, all with a shared purpose. But it is difficult to drive that interdisciplinarity, and I think one of the difficulties from an academic perspective, and I appreciate that this is changing, but there's still, if you're thinking about academic progression, promotion, then there are disciplines who highly value discipline-specific publications. So there are disciplines that you have to publish in a certain number of journals if you want to get on, and that really encourages very narrow, focused work, which I should say is also deeply important, right? I mean, this whole, I'm running an institute, so I'm completely on board with the de-siloing, but it's nonsensical to think that you have to de-silo everything and everybody has to work together all the time. There has to be a core focus on the fundamental work of the discipline, because otherwise that part is not going to get done. It's the same as the debate between basic and applied research. There has to be a fundamental basis that we have and that we fund, and that is blue sky discovery based. But I think if encouraging the kind of crosstalk that we can have in institutes does allow people then to open up and find the avenues that they can work in. So to give a concrete example, last week the Institute ran an early career workshop day where we had PhD students and postdocs from across the different faculties here, but also from universities all around the country, who came and presented on their work that was all related to themes within climate risk and response. And what that meant was that we had sessions where you had a presentation from a climate scientist, followed by a presentation from an economics student, followed by a presentation from someone in behavioral science or psychology. And they could then see the ways in which those different disciplines were approaching problems, and not just learn about the topic, but also learn about the methods. And I think that kind of thinking and encouraging the frameworks, whether that be through an institute, whether it be through seed fund type grants, whether it be through the kind of sandbox thing where you are able to then see who the industry partners are that you want to work with, all of those can help, I think, drive and facilitate that kind of interaction. But it's not easy. And there are certain academics for whom that is what they want to do, and researchers that they want to do, and there are others that don't want to do that. And I don't think that's a value judgment. I mean, I think we all recognise that we're in this place where the situations that we face as a society are beyond disciplinary boundaries, so we need to encourage it. But that doesn't mean that isolated disciplines should not still exist and pursue on their own.
So responding as a dean in that regard. So first of all, I think
we're all 100% on board with the importance of disciplinary, specific, and fundamental work, like the massive breakthroughs like RNA vaccines, discovery of the ozone layer. All these things started deeply rooted in science, and then they became relevant without anyone directly knowing why. That said, the ones who could and would at times still just rely on that random walk. So I'm very keen to think about what we can do in 2025 and going forward to make it easier for people to learn from their colleagues,
to go in one of these sandboxes for something like for half a year, work on a project. So very specifically, what can we do to help the ones that are interested in that space to develop quicker?
So we have I'm part of the New South Wales Decarbonisation Innovation Hub. So this is a hub that is, again, meant to be cross-disciplinary. And we have a function coming up for ECRs where we're talking across discipline. But I think that it seems as though we're all relying on us setting up these cross-disciplinary institutes that cut across, that there seem to be a lot of throughout New South Wales, and institutes and things like that. Is there a way that we can take a bigger picture view and look at actually what the uni's doing more broadly, and then look at ways to incentivize? So as mentioned, there is still this very typical view for academic progression that quantitative metrics are really important. Hey, what's your H-index type stuff? Can we look at ways to move away from quantitative metrics to celebrate research and look at impact? And yes, it's harder to measure, it takes more work, but it also means that things like cross-disciplinary, which tend to be, let's say, harder once you're set up already doing fundamental research, there's a longer timeline on these things. Can we look at ways we can incentivize that? So once that connection's made, and it's great, oh cool, there's an interesting project, is there a way that we can say, well, the impact of that project will be greater because it takes more time, and incentivize that pathway?
I use your mentioning of assessing impact to plug what we run at UNSW, which is the Pact for Impact, which on the one hand looks at measuring the impact and doing that in a more diverse way than just citations, but also puts the fact first that when we take something out of the university and scale the impact up, it happens most of the time in partnerships, and sort of value those partnerships. But after that very selfish plug, so the next question is about partners and what we can do in partnership, and also around already implemented government legislation. You buy a lot of stuff for UNSW. Libby and you as the sort of procurement arm of the university. What can we do there to drive proper behavior in society, and again, take an exemplary position as an institution?
What can UNSW do to drive change? I guess I'll respond through a lens of kind of my focus, which is our campuses and our operations. So then it's our role to walk the talk that you mentioned earlier. So then I think looking at where our carbon footprint is, a lot of that's in our supply chain, it's in our travel, it's in our investment activities as a university. So travel and supply chain, those are two areas where staff in particular can really make a difference through their choices. So at the moment we're working through we've developed some carbon dashboards, and the idea is to raise awareness about each of our faculties and divisions, what their key emission sources are, right down into their supply chain. So quite a lot of detailed information in a very visual form. So we're planning to release this shortly. We started doing a bit of a roadshow with the faculties and divisions, and we would like to basically workshop with each of our faculties how they can work with us to help reduce emissions, because these are difficult challenges that it's not about changing a contract and moving over to renewable energy or installing a solar PV system. It's about change, and that means working with partners, working with external organisations, suppliers, to help them reduce their emissions. So that's it's challenging work, and it needs time and it needs focus. But I think we're planning to start by shining some light on the problem, and then I think a few of the the kind of levers that we have to tackle those and to show that we're walking the talk are tackling any unnecessary consumption, improving the way that we share resources. Can we look at what reuse systems we could implement on campus? Making sure that we have a sustainable procurement framework and a set of processes and templates. Making sure that our people are using those in new purchasing, and then having a really hard look at what we're, at our travel emissions and our the causes of our international travel in particular, because that's what drives our travel footprint, and looking at are there ways that we can still succeed in our mission, but start to, to reduce some of the international travel.
So could you maybe briefly mention what you're proud of, what the university has already achieved, and thinking sort of 25, 26, the things that in your opinion you would like to achieve?
What we're proud of, I think, I guess as a university, the university's made a number of really kind of world-leading changes, like the work around solar PV technology, the work around recycling technology coming out of the Smart Center. And then I guess looking at our kind of physical operations campuses, we were one of the first universities to switch to solar PV, 100% renewable electricity. We have been we've been working on a project called plastic-free dining for a number of years, and this is mostly phased out single-use plastics from catering services on the campus, both drop-off and retailers. Still a bit of work to do there, but those are a few of the initiatives that we've been fairly successful with. But I think, going forward, I think what we would like to, we've set our carbon targets. We need to halve our emissions in the next 5 years. Well, a further 25% reduction in the next 5 years. So that does mean tackling those value chain emissions, supply chain investments, and travel emissions. If we can get a handle on those and get to that 2030 target, I'll be really proud of that, and I think we can point to that and say, we made actual changes to the way we do things to be able to get there.
Thank you, Will. We have about sort of 15 minutes left. I would like to open up to the floor. Things you would like to see, bright ideas, questions to the panels, please. Try to use this. There we have one.
Thank you. Tommy Wiedmann from Civil and Environmental Engineering, and it's so great to see you there, and really good to see all the activity at the university. I suppose the good news here is that we are in a sustainable transition already. The focus is now really on accelerating that, and you have really spoken to that. I very much subscribe to the idea of consuming less as well. Demand reduction is one of the things that IPCC and others have shown to have one of the biggest effects of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. So my own research, we're trying to look into possibilities of degrowth and how that could work. And also life cycle perspective, fully subscribe to that as well. So I think there's good things happening. There is still an elephant a bit in the room, I think, in terms of phasing out old technology. So we are pretty good at coming up with new ideas and then new technology. And of course, this is necessary. And I think UNSW has done a great job in that over decades, really. But when you look at globally, solar energy has mostly catered to the growth of energy consumption and not really pushed down fossil fuels. So they have decreased just a little bit, but because there is still a lot of growth and increased energy demand, we are not really getting away from fossil fuels. In Australia, yes, domestically, fossil fuel power stations are phasing out. So I think, again, fairly good progress there, but still we are exporting a lot of coal, and that doesn't seem to be going down. And of course, that still has an impact. And so I'm not sure. Is there anything that UNSW can help to do to accelerate the phase out of linear economy, of old technologies? They said, same with the circular economy. There are good ideas and models, but as long as the circular economy models are more expensive than linear economy, nothing will change. So is there anything we can do on that front? Thank you.
So one thing that I can comment on is the continuing emissions of fossil fuels. So one project that the Institute for Climate Risk and Response, in conjunction with the Australian Human Rights Institute, has just released a couple of different reports looking at the exact point that you're making, the impact of emissions that are offshore, so scope 3 emissions in the way that they're quantified and the impact is looked at. Still increasing, and still, because that's driven by demand overseas for Australian coal, because Australian coal is perceived to be cleaner, and it's a market that people are happy to deal with because it's a safe kind of a market that can ensure supply. And that's a massive impact, and it's got a massive impact on lots of vulnerable societies around the world, not least our partners in the Pacific. And I think one way that the university can contribute to that is through these kinds of projects that acknowledge those impacts, don't shy away from them, through thinking about sort of the Human Rights Institute's interest, and the Institute for Climate Risk and Response interest is also from a kind of climate litigation perspective, and thinking about what are the legal levers that can then be pulled to think about making those companies actually more accountable for what they're doing. And it's difficult because you look at impact statements that companies will put out and say, well, it's very hard to identify the contribution of this specific project to global warming more generally, and therefore, because you can't identify that specific impact, we'll say it's not having a significant impact, therefore we can go ahead and have the Scarborough gas mine or whatever. So I think shining a light on that, and thinking about how you can actually use climate science, for example, to start to quantify those impacts, quantify those estimates. We've got a project that we're involved in that's starting to look at that and figure that out, which can then lead into policy change, can lead into legal frameworks. I think just as another thought on this, and sort of going back to the question about how can we be taking a leadership role both at the university but also nationally, we have a potential huge opportunity with the UN COP climate summit, which Australia is hoping to get the hosting rights for in 2026, so the COP31 summit. If we get the rights to host that, it will be in conjunction with Pacific Island partners, and I think that will be a huge opportunity and a real need to actually step up and be responsible and not be seen, to host that climate talks while still being one of the largest fossil fuel emitters in the world is not going to be a great look. Although I guess, given that it's going to be in Baku and last year it was in Dubai, there's form there. But I think it has to advance that conversation if we get that. And again, the universities can play a role, and we're involved in a project at COP31 Alliance with universities to try and support that bit and make it as successful as possible.
Do you want to briefly talk about the partnerships you have in the Institute in driving that?
Well, I mean, the partnership with the Human Rights Institute is also then partnering with legal firms who are getting involved in that project. We also have partnerships with insurance and finance who are interested in understanding what are going to be the implications of the changing climate for those markets, with the change in the regulatory structure that's happening about disclosing the impact of climate on companies. That those are the sorts of partners that are coming up in most of our initial conversations, because they see the need for understanding the science, understanding the impact on their reporting procedures, and really integrating those two.
More questions? I would again encourage you questions to the panel, or ideas that you have, what you would like to see in sort of measurable goals for next year, please.
Thanks so much for the discussion. I'm Bronwyn Morgan from the law faculty, and I was just I was very intrigued by the elective you talked about, Ben, running, and I also managed to extract from the website some sort of impact focus ideas, which included talking about a livable futures network, which I thought was very interesting. I just wanted to sort of imagine, could we build on Livable Futures actually captures in quite a nuanced way some of these social challenges of lower consumption, along with the technical challenges that the science on the carbon and biodiversity side can address. And I'm just wondering if, I don't know whether that subject is an elective, but if we could create capstone cross-campus courses that could link with this kind of elective. I guess it would be up to each faculty whether they wanted to create a discipline-specific capstone. But if anyone that did could then work as well on challenges set by industry partners. So just as you described those partners, those challenges could be identified as projects, and then the sort of final part of the capstone experience is a cross-campus, cross-disciplinary applied experience. And yeah, which contributes to whatever one of the goals that we have. And just to sort of say business and arts, I think, could really contribute to the lower consumption social side of things, which we're not hearing as much on.
The course that I mentioned is actually a capstone course. So it's a third-year course that all of the students graduating with a psychology degree have to do. And
maybe hand the mic to Alastair, because he's the one who conned the Livable Futures. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, so that sort of term sprung out of the discussions around restoring habitats, but we don't, in practice, we're not often restoring to what they used to be, but we're actually wanting to make something better that, for futures, recognising that people want to live in environments that are, more supportive of both economies and lifestyles. Absolutely agree that we need to structure things across the campus that bring in the full range of disciplines for our, education processes, but particularly things around environmental management and postgraduate issues. The roadblocks in my field for something like, restoring marine habitats, it's not actually the science in many cases. It's the regulatory frameworks. It's the dealing with business, dealing with governments. So it absolutely requires, business knowledge, requires legal knowledge. And that's the world that our scientists need to go and work in, and we need to be training them to navigate in that world. Just this week and the last few weeks, we've been giving our first-year science students a taste of this through a new capstone course for all incoming Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Advanced Science students, and we're giving them these grand challenges, ideas, forcing them to work in, forcing is probably the wrong word, gently encouraging them to work in multidisciplinary teams to recognise that the solutions to all those problems can't come from just maths or just chemistry or just biology. And it makes them a little bit uncomfortable. The mathematicians have to talk to the biologists and vice versa. But it's being driven by the recognition that those solutions just can't come from one group by itself. So we're pushing that idea first year. We need to now mirror that at the upper level things for the folks going out to, more closely into the workforce.
And we reached out to ADA to do more in that education space, and doing that, we can add a lot to that, will be fantastic. Sarah, please.
Yeah, thanks. Sarah Madison, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Education and Student Experience. And what we've been doing on the education side is looking at all 4 of the societal impact themes and asking how can we make sure that's embedded in every degree program at UNSW, acknowledging we've got a lot of students in the room and they're really passionate about exactly these topics. So thinking exactly, Ben, as you talked about for researchers working interdisciplinary, one of the things we've got in the strategy under Empower Current and Future Generations is societal impact challenge projects being inside all of our courses. We know we've already got capstones, which are really critical in bringing together that disciplinary view of everything I've learned across my 3 or 4 years of my degree. But how do we now sort of accelerate that or lift that up to these really broader societal impact themes, like accelerating the transition to a sustainable society, and have interdisciplinary challenge-based projects that is tying to exactly what you're talking about. So next year we'll be trying to build the foundations of what that could look like in all of the degree programs, acknowledging exactly as you've said, we do need to have discipline-specific deep knowledge as our founding knowledge and tools and techniques, but then how do we come together? How do all of our students then come together and work in interdisciplinary teams with you, our researchers, and with our industry and community partners? I think we've got an incredibly exciting opportunity here, and I look forward to working with all of you to make that happen in this space. Thanks.
Exciting.
Very good. More questions and suggestions, please.
I'm Claudia from the Trailblazer Recycling and Clean Energy. You mentioned the need to get university technology out of the lab to the industry's hands. What do you see as the key barriers to doing that currently, and how would you incentivize more of that in the future?
And whoever jumps in, please the question briefly for the people who are not here.
So the question for onliners was about research translating into real life impact and what are the key barriers for that. I think that there are two things at the in my opinion at the moment that are the key barriers. One is a reduced desire for the fundamental research. You see the ARC and other funding bodies are moving away from funding or the benefit of seeing fundamental research. And without fundamental research, we don't have anything to translate in a decade or two. So that needs to keep going as a key pillar. Translatable research, there are many different barriers in terms of what might be preventing something from going out to have real impact. One of them is just the desire to change and a cost base, and a lot of things that I don't necessarily understand from a sort of change perspective, but from a technology perspective, it's economic drivers. Do the costs add up? Is it going to be more expensive to get your electricity? Are you going to have to change the way that you live? And if you do, then there's maybe less of a driving force to do so. So that one's a really big challenge. The other aspects are just things that are linking with industry partners, finding that right need, looking at things like IP and where that sits. And all of those, while they seem like menial challenges, when you add them all up, they are barrier after barrier that prevent things then from going to being translated to make real world impact. So there's a few different challenges that probably need to be looked at from different angles in that, at least my perspective.
While others think, I think the trailblazers are actually a very interesting exercise. And to a degree, as a university, I think we have to ask ourselves, why did it need the government to sort of spark this? And why didn't we think ourselves how we could bring sort of people together? The amazing part about the Trailblazer was that they were stood up in no time because the government didn't give us any time. And UNSW did very well because UNSW had lots of partners and expertise. So I think we should really step back and answer your question is like, what can we do to bring people together in these topical areas? And how do we get those barriers out of the way? Yeah. So I'm just repeating your question, but I think we shouldn't wait for the government. We should own this.
It's a big challenge, and universities in other, like in Germany, for example, are really good at having this industry uni links that are really deeply embedded that then enable quicker transformation. But we, at least in chemical engineering, we don't necessarily have the size of the industry in Australia. So that is a barrier in itself too.
But in Germany, they also have, say, next to the Max Planck, which is all the fundamental, they have the Fraunhofer, which is really driving, like, on a national scale, that kind of behavior. And they're next to the university, not in the university. But can we model that? Yeah. So it's 2 minutes to 12. We have to end on time. Libby, final word. Fantastic.
So the bean counter in the room. It's double-barreled. As I understand it, at the moment we have a level of consternation about transition. And I'm thinking in areas that we have real interest in terms of minerals, mining, fossil fuels, and to your point, Emma, about, and I absolutely agree with you, we should be transforming those minerals on our soil before it leaves and comes back, and I can have a whole other conversation with you about it. One thing that's playing in the back of my mind is how we might be able to collectively influence major funding bodies. And I'm thinking of things like superannuation funds. They're actually, I think, almost more powerful now than the government grant system. And I wonder if there's not an opportunity for us to work through major groups like that to influence their investment decisions, which might be a bit of a virtuous circle, to have them, you know, influence industry.
Probably not best I'll pass the microphone on, but I think that consumers are pushing for that too. So if you can put the two together, there is a big sort of push for change.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think there is definitely evidence for shareholder activism or member activism in the superannuation area. I know that there's been, I mean, because of the concerns over greenwashing and the fact that super companies have had their knuckles wrapped for being less than being economical with the truth, or being, that I think that it is still, the steps are too incremental at the moment. I think changes in things like the sustainable finance taxonomy, which is actively being worked on at the moment. We had a session at our industry forum last week all about green bonds and how that green bond market is growing, but it's growing slowly because people don't fully understand what a green bond is and what the necessary requirements or criteria are. I think once that kind of thing starts to shift, and once public attitudes, which are already shifting, start to translate into movement in boardrooms, then I think that's got to be I agree, they have such vast amounts invested that we have to work on it.
Thank you. Quick one.
Okay, I was just going to add, we also have the opportunity to look at through that lens with the university's own investments. We've got requirements around carbon emission reduction, fossil fuels, climate solutions. Could we have a closer look at some of those points that you raised?
Thank you, Will. I really like this walk the walk, but also influence partners at scale as a closure. I would like to encourage you all, please engage with the strategy. Like, we are all the university, so it has to be our strategy. And at that point, I would like to really thank our four speakers again, and thank you all for coming.